Endocrine system is the system where hormones have a main role to play. And if you see the definition of hormone, we often say that they are chemical substances which are released in minute quantities and bring about changes, or the physiological effects are altered in the target organ where this hormone goes and works. Now, this hormone is not having a program for itself where it would know what is the target organ, and how a small quantity of a messenger, as we call them chemical messengers, how a small quantity of that chemical substance is going to bring about such large implications. As for example, we study there are disorders, hormonal disorders, there is hyposecretion of hormone or hypersecretion of hormone, and there are so huge disorders that we study, one of them being diabetes caused by insulin. So, you can make it out that there would be some mechanism which is responsible for bringing out the proper cascade of changes according to which the physiological effects would be affected in the target organ or the target tissue. So, how it happens? There is a proper mechanism for hormonal action. First thing is that it is secreted at a different site, a chemical that would be synthesized by a particular gland, then it would go through the bloodstream to the target organ. That point is clear, that somewhere it is being secreted by some cells. Now, because it is a chemical compound, it is a chemical compound synthesized inside the body, either it is going to be an amino acid derivative, that is, it could be a catecholamine, it could be a peptide, small peptide, large peptide, or it is going to be a steroid hormone. So, we have two broad categories of hormones. One is that they could be steroids, other is that they could be iodine derivatives, as in the case of thyroxine and the rest of the hormones which were triiodothyronine, we saw that they were iodine derivatives. Other could be amino acids, as we have the example of catecholamines, adrenal hormones. Then they could be peptide hormones, as the example of insulin. So, we are having categories of hormones because ultimately they are chemical compounds, and the chemical compounds which are synthesized inside the cell. So, these categories are there, and when they have to go to the target organ for their functioning, what they have to come across is the cell membrane. Now, you all know the structure of cell membrane is lipid bilayer. It would be easier for the steroid hormones to pass through that lipid bilayer, but it won't be easier for the catecholamines or the peptide hormones or the protein derivatives to easily pass through that plasma membrane, that is lipid bilayer. So, let us consider the example of insulin, that how it is going to do that action which it is responsible for bringing about the change. Now, you know what insulin is responsible for? Insulin is responsible for lowering the blood sugar, that is, it has to make the blood level lower with the sugar, dissolved sugar. In case the blood sugar is higher, that means the sugar is not taken up by the cells. Now, we take the example of the insulin hormone over here. So, we are to deal with the cells, and those cells which would be responsible for taking up the glucose. There would be a cascade of proteins which we do not study because we do not study amplification in detail. What we have to confine ourselves to our understanding is that how the second messenger is being formed, what is the role of plasma membrane in the mechanism of hormone action, and in case there is no plasma membrane restriction, as in the case of steroid hormones, what happens? See, ultimately the hormone has to bring about either the change in the proper metabolic process. The metabolic processes, they are chemical reactions, either there should be some change in that, and that would be done by a metabolite production, or it could be a change in the gene functioning. As in the case of steroid hormones, you know that there are many changes, that is, in puberty the human body undergoes so many changes, that change, all those changes and that mechanism could be regulated at gene level only. Now, supposedly we talk about a male who is showing puberty. Now, it has to undergo certain changes. There would be secretion of testosterone that would increase, which would be responsible for development of secondary sexual characters. Now, that cannot take place by simple metabolic changes, because it has to do something with the genes which are responsible for production of a particular hormone. Now, it has to deal with the genes of the cell so that the changes could be brought about. For that, we have steroidal hormones. We will come to that, but before we have the case of non-steroidal hormones, how it takes place is through extracellular receptors which are present at the target organ. I hope I have put the point clearly that we have a hormone. It starts from the site where it is produced, supposedly that is the endocrine gland. It has to come through the bloodstream to the target organ or the target cells. these target cells, they have a membrane around them. This is the nucleus of the target cell, supposedly this is the nucleus, and over here it has to either reach the genes or it has to bring about metabolic changes inside the cell. This is the target cell. Now when the hormone gets released from the endocrine gland, it reaches at the target cell. If it is not in the category of steroids, it would undergo the mechanism that we are studying now. If it is a protein hormone, then it will have to deal with extracellular receptors which are present on the plasma membrane of the target cell. Now these extracellular receptors, they are primarily glycoproteins only. As we are dealing with the case of insulin, what we see over here is that there is an extracellular receptor which is having 2 alpha subunits and 2 beta subunits. Alpha subunits have this hormone binding site. These two are the sites, site number 1 and site number 2, where the hormone particles can come and bind with the alpha parts, and there is a beta receptor, beta subunit, that is passing through and through the membrane, that is the membrane part, and this beta subunit has a cytoplasmic domain as well. So this is the extracellular receptor, this green to blue to green part. These are the extracellular receptor, and I have represented single extracellular receptor over here, which is present through the plasma membrane. Now what happens is the hormone comes and binds to the receptor. When this hormone binds with the receptor, there is change in the conformational change in the membrane part, that is the beta subunit. As soon as the beta subunit undergoes conformational change, it induces that change in the cytoplasmic domain as well, and it leads to the addition of phosphates. Phosphates come and get added to these cytoplasmic domains, both of them. Apart from this, there would be substrates as well, substrate, and to those substrate binding molecules, and to those also there would be addition of phosphates. Now what would happen as a result of this phosphate addition? There would be a change and the second messengers would be formed. Okay, the second messengers or the mediators would be formed. Now in this case you have to remember that cyclic AMP, that is cyclic adenosine monophosphate, acts as the second messenger, which would bring about cascade of changes along with calcium ions which are released from the endoplasmic reticulum. Now see this conformational change, this beta subunit is basically an enzyme only, that is tyrosine kinase. And you know, most of the hormones are derivative of amino acid tyrosine only. Okay, so not triosine, it is tyrosine. The spellings are a little bit wrong. Tyrosine kinase is the enzyme that is present over here. As soon as the hormone comes and binds with it, it undergoes a conformational change which enables addition of phosphate to the cytoplasmic domain of the extracellular receptor. This is a glycoprotein basically. Now when this phosphate addition takes place and the conformational change has taken place, there is release of calcium ions from endoplasmic reticulum. These calcium ions are going to bring about many metabolic changes. Again a cascade effect would begin. Now what is a cascade? It is a waterfall, and when I say cascade in this context, it is waterfall of many compounds, intermediates, metabolic intermediates that would come. Also there would be breakage of ATP cells in the presence of adenylate cyclase. Remember this enzyme's name, adenylate cyclase would be the enzyme that would break down the ATP, that would give rise to cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP would work as the second messenger. This second messenger or the mediator is again going to bring cascade of changes which would be present in the form of metabolic intermediates, and then there would be amplification of signal which would be responsible for that metabolic process which the hormone intends to do. Alright, so we see these 3 points, and this is how the mechanism of hormone action takes place. All you have to remember is that the hormone comes and binds with the extracellular receptors. As soon as the binding takes place, there is a conformational change that takes place. That conformational change brings about the production of a second messenger, which is further going to bring about metabolic changes as intended by the hormonal action. This was in the case of peptide hormones. As in the case of steroid hormones, let's take the example of testosterone supposedly that is produced in male gonads, and it has to go to those parts like let's take the example of stimulating the follicles responsible for growth of beard in men. So the hormone would be secreted, that is testosterone. It has to come to the hair follicles and bring about the change, that is, it is to be stimulated at puberty for the formation of beard or the growth of beard. Now it comes to the target organ. Because it is a steroid hormone, it can easily pass through the plasma membrane. It would directly go and interact with the nuclear membrane and go and bind to the chromosomal part, that is inside the chromosome. The hormone would directly come and join with the gene and bring about the changes whichever are necessary. So this is all about mechanism of hormone action. You need not to get into detail how the amplification takes place, because it is altogether a metabolic process that you would have to understand. It would involve glucose formation if we take the example of insulin. All you have to keep in mind is that how the extracellular receptor is responsible for formation of a second messenger that is responsible for bringing about the changes. Hormone itself stays outside. It is not responsible for bringing any sort of change inside because it cannot pass the membrane. So whatever information it is bringing, the metabolic changes information that it brings is passed on to a messenger. That messenger brings about those metabolic changes, and our hormonal action is